Standardized hospitality spaces are designed to operate as highly optimized closed-system economies. They function as rigid logistical frameworks built to process capital and human behavior. The precise dataset for mapping these hidden mechanics is the Petton-Pritchard wedding, hosted at the Cotswold Chine Country House Hotel. The operational volume for this specific event is fixed. A 47-room facility must process an initial batch of 86 daytime human units, followed by a secondary influx of 28 evening units. Executing an intake of this scale requires strict spatial optimization. The facility relies on rigorous temporal buffering to move bodies through designated zones without friction. By analyzing the highly specific, mundane operational data of this single event, we can map the exact tolerances and systemic workflows that govern the modern hospitality industry. A social event like a wedding is an exercise in synchronizing unpredictable external variables with rigid internal baselines to guarantee continuous throughput. This architectural blueprint charts the macro infrastructure of the facility, establishing the capital baseline required to host large-scale gatherings. The primary structural investment set a high entry cost. The facility recently required a retiled roof, requiring £94,000 in capital, alongside newly installed electric vehicle chargers costing £14,000. The core processing node of the entire operation is the kitchen footprint. Exactly 87 square meters of space scales the culinary output across 6 localized gas ranges. Maintaining baseline capacity requires specific heavy equipment upgrades, such as an 11,800-pound walk-in refrigerator installed late the previous year. These massive fixed investments demand continuous, perfectly optimized event cycles to properly amortize the cost over time. The physical plant is also constrained by external policy limitations, specifically strict local fire codes that dictate how the infrastructure can be used. Local regulations require a 14-day notice to ignite real fires in the lounge. The operational workaround is to deploy electric heater stand-ins to simulate environmental control without violating policy. Activating this infrastructure requires managerial buffering. The general manager arrives at the site exactly 30 minutes prior to her standard start time to oversee the complex initialization process. Capital expenditure establishes the absolute rigid physical capacity of the system. All subsequent human behavior must conform to these architectural limits. The primary variable disrupting this closed system is persistent weather. The baseline state is continuous precipitation, running unbroken since the preceding Tuesday. This line chart tracks the available operational window predicted by meteorological data. It identifies a narrow 40-minute dry trough occurring strictly between 1410 and 1450. Human traffic must be routed precisely within this window to execute critical external event phases before the environment degrades. The contracted photographer faces a severe optimization challenge, capturing all required visual assets before the window permanently closes. The required output involves executing 14 specific multi-person configurations stationed outside on the terrace. Processing mobility-impaired units introduces compounding logistical drag during this sprint. An 89-year-old guest requires specialized, localized seating to participate. To mitigate this drag, internal support must respond immediately. An 11-year veteran casual staff member is dispatched to a remote garage block to retrieve the necessary hardware. The temporal execution succeeds. Precipitation resumes at exactly 1448, validating the strict routing model deployed by the staff. Operational success relies entirely on exploiting micro windows of opportunity and maintaining absolute temporal rigidity. The system employs spatial buffering as a mechanical failsafe to mitigate social friction among the guests. This schematic blueprint visualizes the spatial manifest for the Regency Suite, configured to process the 86 confirmed human units. The company enforces a strict internal service-level agreement regarding seating deployment. During arrival phases, to avoid bottlenecks, physical deployment requires arranging 96 chairs in 12 rows, creating an intentional 11.6% capacity buffer. This calculated overdeployment prevents localized disruption or offense, while the units self-organize within the room. We can shift from spatial buffers to internal processing metrics by analyzing a time-motion study of dessert distribution. The primary input is a 340-pound, 3-tiered consumable asset, procured from an external bakery. This motion time graphic maps the precise processing parameters. A single staff member utilizes a serrated tool to divide the mass into 114 specific portions, placed individually on grease-proof squares. The total processing time clocks in at 22 minutes, yielding an average processing speed of exactly 11.5 seconds per unit. Third-party vendors are also rigidly integrated into this spatial framework, taking the form of a hired string quartet. Their contractual boundaries are strictly defined. They execute a 3-hour operational block for 620 pounds, inclusive of travel and acoustic sound checks. Floristry logistics follow a similar consumption pattern. An 820-pound total expenditure is deployed to augment the space, only to be entirely abandoned post-event. The illusion of a seamless social event relies entirely on a hidden network of over-engineered buffers and rigidly timed microtasks that the consumer is never meant to perceive. Moving into the evening phase of the operation, the core economic model of the facility shifts. The influx of the 28 secondary units intentionally increases the density of the event space. This Sankey diagram illustrates the economic pivot, tracking the transition from heavily amortized fixed costs to active, high-margin retail value extraction. The specific extraction vehicles during this phase rely on localized retail sales, driven by 5-pound 40-pence pints of beer and 24-pound bottles of Prosecco. The ultimate operational boundary for this extraction phase is triggered by the strict midnight cessation of the DJ's contract. Once the deadline is met, the systemic purge begins. External units vacate the 62-space car park, while internal units retreat to their assigned residential grids. The internal staff execute the final facility reset. They stack chairs, sweep floors, and store assets, returning the physical plant to its exact starting baseline. Only one unmanaged variable remains outside the system, a forgotten Prosecco glass on the terrace, filling with rainwater until it overflows. This chaotic, overflowing glass stands in direct contrast to the perfectly contained, fully processed microeconomy inside the dormant hotel. A hospitality event is a temporary, highly localized spike in energy and capital, rigorously processed by a machine that resets itself the moment the final unit powers down.